Chapter 14, Get a Job. After the long, dreary New Jersey winters, the welcome spring thaw came around again, and a lot of the available work for your average Joe was seasonal. Ed was told by an acquaintance that a couple of the blacktop companies in town were looking for laborers. So Ed and I went down to the paving yard and knocked on some doors. I didn't know it at the time, but it was predetermined who was going to work for who. Ed's buddy, who I'd never been too crazy about, had it arranged that Ed would be hired by the company he worked for. There were about 3 or 4 different paving companies operating out of the same yard on Route 31 in Hampton. One was called Allen & Petty. The other few companies were made up of a few brothers named Hicks. The youngest, Charlie, about my age, was a classmate at one point early on in Hampton Public, until his father guided him into the business, eventually branching off on his own. Ed's buddy, who worked for Allen & Petty, told the boss to hire Ed. That left me to work for one of the Hicks brothers named Henry. I took the job at about $200 a week. Cha-ching! Plenty of money for a kid my age, I thought. I was about 16, and although I didn't like getting up in the morning, about the same time I would have woken up for the school bus, it was better than doing nothing, and at least I was making some money. I had fun some nights at the paving yard drinking beer with the other guys, which was actually quite often. Once in a while some guitars would come out and I would join in. We would have a good time and go till late at night, but those nights didn't make getting out of bed any easier the next morning. On the job, all I had to do was whatever I was told. Shovel this, tamp that, dig here, dig there, get in the truck, get out of the truck. My baby skin hands were always ripped to shreds from not wearing work gloves. One of the guys I worked with was a big diesel guy from Easton, Pennsylvania. He was a cousin of Larry Holmes, knew the champ growing up and sometimes sparred with him. His name happened to be Larry also. Sometimes when no one was around, when we should have been working, Larry would throw down the tools and show me how to spar. He would say, "Now put your hands up. You gotta move a little now. Cover up, cover up." Bam! He would just tap me on the side of my face and say, "You just got knocked out." He told me I listened good, sarcastically, but I had a lot of reach and I could learn, but I just had to put on about 100 pounds. He would say, "Why are you so damn skinny? You eat like 2 people. You come on up to the gym in Easton and we'll train you in the ring, get you on some weights." That sounded intriguing to me because I desperately wanted to be tough and learn to be a good fighter. But it's a good thing I didn't, being I needed to protect what little brain I did have, and I say that with all sincerity. I had a lot of fun with Larry, and I liked him. He was also a pimp and drove a big old brown Cadillac that by night was cruising with 3 or 4 scantily dressed ladies in the back seat. He used to promise me a go-around on him, but it never panned out. I'm glad for that too. I probably would have caught something. One of the funniest and unbelievable things that I ever saw on the job was during our preparing a driveway for the blacktop to arrive. There were Larry and I raking some freshly dumped stone all the way down the long drive of an upper middle class home. At one point, a bit of a chubby woman who looked a little on the eclectic side poked her head out of the door and asked us if we would like something to drink. We said, "Sure, thank you." She came and handed me an iced tea in a glass, then got a little closer to Larry and asked him if he would like a beer or something else instead. Larry replied, "Yeah, I would like a beer. Looks like you know me pretty well." As she turned to walk to the house for the beer, she said to Larry, "Oh, I know a lot more about you than you think." That was kind of weird, I said. From another door in the back of the house, she yelled out, "Here's your beer!" Larry handed me the rake he was holding and walked around the back of the house. I drank my tea and raked some more stone and raked some more stone. But Larry wasn't coming back. Uh-oh, I wonder what the hell is going on in there. I raked the whole driveway by myself before Larry finally came back, maybe an hour and a half later. He said, "Oh, shit, man, you raked the whole thing by yourself?" Well, yeah, I didn't want Henry to come back and it wasn't done. He'd have been yelling and carrying on. Whoa, wait a minute. Hey, you smell awful nice. Man, what the hell were you doing in there? Larry said, "Man, that crazy bitch poured me a scotch, washed me in the shower, and put me up in the bed." You've got to be joking me. Why don't things like that happen to me? Man, damn! When Henry got back to the job, the rest of the crew pulled up with him, unloaded the paving machine, and the blacktop came in the dump truck, and it was time to work. While we were shoveling away, asses and elbows, Larry looked at me and said, "Don't you say nothing, man." I said, "Come on, I'm not going to say anything." Of course, he promised me a go-around with his girls again on the house. Later that evening, as we were finishing up and loading the equipment, the husband came home and parked out on the road due to the fresh blacktop on the driveway. As he came walking toward the house, he had his wallet out and was handing the guys each a $10 bill and told us to have one on him. Thanks for the good work. Larry took his 10 and said, "Thank you, sir." I don't think I remembered Larry looking him in the eye. I thought, oh my effing God, that poor bastard. During the workday, Henry would sometimes get upset and yell at me. I thought, one more time and I'm walking home. He'd yell at me again. I thought, one more time and I'm walking home. He'd yell at me again. If I took off walking home from wherever the job was on any particular day, I could have been walking 20, 40, 50 miles. I was better off keeping my mouth shut, waiting it out, and riding home in the truck. Then the fellas would have some beer back at the yard, I would join in and forget about it, and tomorrow's another day. In reality, Henry tried to treat me very well, in fact, but I was just a dumb kid who didn't want to learn anything, and I didn't respect much. He often bought the guys lunch, coffee, and bagels most mornings. After a while, he let me use one of his trucks to drive to and from work, a little Subaru Brat. All he asked for in return is that I cleaned it. It was nice of him, but he was the boss, and I had it in my head that the boss was the enemy no matter how good he treated me. Go figure. Needless to say, my paving career didn't last more than a summer, but in the meantime, Ben and Boober had gotten a job with Henry as well. We worked together for a while and made it getting out of bed a little easier in the morning when your friends are outside tapping on your bedroom window. Until then, Ben and I were never really that close of friends, but the job gave us something in common and we all got along well. Eventually, something happened on the job that made Henry mad as hell. He yelled something at me and I said, "Asshole," as I was turning away. I don't think I intended him to hear it, but he did. He shouted at me to call him an asshole one more time. Actually, his words were, "Call me another asshole." I replied with something like, "I didn't say asshole." There was noise from the job, there was machinery running, and he interpreted me as calling him, well, another asshole. Now Henry was really mad, more than mad. And about that time, his brother had stopped by on his way home from another job. Henry was so pissed off at me, all he said to his brother was, "Take him with you." I guess that means I'm fired. Now, being young and not thinking more than a day ahead in life, I was just glad to get an early ride home. So that was it. My last day of tamping blacktop and shoveling stone. The last time I saw Henry years later, in 1990-something, was in a little deli store in Ringo's, New Jersey, where I lived at the time. He seemed to be in good spirits. We talked for a few minutes and he told me about the new house he was building for himself in Asbury. I was glad to see him, and it went to show that Henry was good-hearted, not holding it against me that I was such a blatant asshole as a kid. I hope he's doing well. When I bumped into Henry at the deli, to my surprise, he had along with him another friend of mine, Greg, who I hadn't seen in a few years. Greg was Ed's brother-in-law at the time, who I had met some years ago while visiting Ed back in Hampton. Ed had gotten married and had two brother-in-laws, Greg and Chad. Both were great guys. When I met Greg and Chad, I was 20 years old and had been married myself for 2 years. One day I had gotten restless, being married very young and living in tired old Lambertville, so something possessed me to take the 45-minute drive up to Hampton in my old Ford truck for some different scenery. I got together with Ed, he introduced me to his wife, Greg, Chad, and his mother-in-law who they lived with, and I eventually met Greg and Chad's father as well. All of whom were great, just really nice people and down to earth, all of them. Greg worked for an auto parts store in Washington, and Chad worked for one of the paving companies at the time. I remember Chad being excited about a truck he had just gotten. His paving boss, Charlie, my old classmate, had bought it for him on the condition that Chad pay him back one paycheck at a time until it was paid off. It was a nice little truck. It was a white Ford Ranger pickup, bright red interior, with a big Harley-Davidson sticker on the rear window. When I first met Chad, it was actually brief. He had a wicked case of allergies, and across the road from his house was a farmer running a tractor in the field, overturning hay, so he had to get in his new truck and drive out of there for the day. Now, it happened to be my 21st birthday, which would have made it August 7th, 1989. Greg took a ride with me in my truck to buy my first legal case of beer. So we drove up to Washington, went to a liquor store, I presented my ID, and off we went. On the way back to Hampton on Route 31, as we were coming up on a Dairy Queen on the right-hand side, in the Dairy Queen parking lot were a bunch of bikers looking to pull out onto the highway. Greg said to me, "Hey, watch out for those bikers." And I did. I slowed down cautiously, and they stopped at the driveway's edge. I continued on my way. At the last millisecond, the lead biker pulls out onto the highway directly in front of me. I hit the motorcycle dead on, doing about 45 or 50. There was also a girl on the back of the bike. The two on the motorcycle went flying. I remember crystal clear, both of them sailing through the air and landing on the road, their bodies skidding and flipping to a stop, maybe 50 feet in front of my truck. The motorcycle itself went spinning, caught another bike's wheel, and took that bike out as well. That second driver landed up on the dirt berm of the road. I was in immediate shock. Everything was tunnel vision, like I was completely removed from reality. Once my truck skidded to a stop, I got out and stood in the middle of the highway. It seemed like I was in a bubble and everything outside of my immediate attention was silent. It's the kind of blur that leaves you frozen in time for what seems like an eternity. but in reality was only a few moments. I saw only a few things. The bodies laying still, ahead in the road, whom I assumed were dead. The second biker hit, who was crawling further up the embankment. The bike gang getting off their bikes, coming for me on foot. The lead guy closest to me holding a chain to beat me with and yelling something about ripping my head off. And Greg, who I noticed in the corner of my eye about an eighth of a mile away, in a field, running away as fast as he could. As I stood there motionless in the middle of the highway, I came to the realization that something terrible just happened. I just killed 2 people and I was about to be beaten badly or killed myself, starting right now. I didn't try to get away or run. I just stood there, surrounded by traffic and bikers. As I came to my wits, the faint sound of police sirens coming up the highway got really close, really fast, and the bikers backed off their attention from me to the 2 I had hit still laying on the highway. It turns out, thankfully, the police were right down the road at a brand new Burger King that was just built. Maybe the only time that I can remember as a kid that I would actually be happy to see the police. The next thing I remember was a couple of police officers directing traffic and getting my account of what happened. Shortly after, the paramedics arrived. My truck and the bike were cleared from the road. In the cluster of cops, EMTs, witnesses, and bikers, the cops were getting my license and so on when I asked how many were dead. One of them replied, "They're alive, scraped up and banged up pretty good. The driver may have a broken leg." The driver of the second bike wasn't seriously hurt. "They're all drunk. They're going to be charged with DOI and taken to the hospital." Wow, they were alive. The best thing I think I've ever heard. The feeling of relief that came over me was indescribable. Not only were they going to be okay, but I wasn't at fault. They were drunk and simply pulled out in front of me. By this time, Greg had made his way back to the scene and was briefly questioned on his account of the accident. By the grace of God, at this particular time, as rare as it was, my license, registration, and insurance were all valid and in order. We were free to go. Greg and I went back to his house to share our scary event with his family and calm down a little. We were both in disbelief and thankful no one was killed. As the day went on, we had been drinking my legally purchased beer in their garage. It was getting a bit late, so Ed offered I crash out for the night. I took him up on it and crashed on the floor in Chad and Greg's bedroom. The next morning we woke up. Mom-in-law poked her head in the bedroom door and said, "Someone smells like they need a makeover," and it was probably me. I hung for a short while the next morning and told him it was nice meeting everyone, and it really was. Thanked everyone for their hospitality and drove home.